So I'm Giorgia.
And I'm Stefanie, and we both love this festival so much. So we've been scheming together to try to find any way possible to make it back this year, as it's Giorgia's third time and it's my fourth time at Eyeo.
And we did it. We couldn't be more honored to give this opening talk. But, well, we're excited to be presenting first also for other reasons, as you can tell from our text when we got the news.
And so, yeah, Eyeo is really special for the two of us because it's a place where we first met. And so we'd really like to thank Eyeo tonight, as from our meeting here, we decided to collaborate on a project called Dear Data, which is not only a collaboration, but also a way for us to get to know each other.
So we hope that you love postcards, drawing, and personal stories, because you will see and hear a lot of this tonight. But first, we want to take a little step back and very briefly talk to you about who we are and what our personal researches in our daily jobs are, to give you an idea of what brought us to meet and collaborate on this very particular data project. I'm Giorgia again. I'm an information designer. Actually, I studied architecture, but luckily for everybody, I didn't build any houses. I never built any houses. I'm an Italian. I live in New York. I moved to the US 3 years ago. And at Eyeo last year and the year before, I've been talking a lot about drawing and sketching with data, and about my personal relationship, or let's call it obsession, with drawing, and about what this practice of drawing with data does to my mind as a data visualization designer. When I work on any kind of data visualization projects, I produce tons of sketches, and even while working digitally with data, I really sketch to understand how spatially organize my data, and to define both the architecture of the piece and the visual aspect of the tiny details. And for my daily job, I direct the design at Accurate, which is a data-driven design company that I co-founded in 2011. We are designers, data analysts, developers, and right now we are 20 people, and those are guys saying you hello from our office in Milan. We started in Italy, and now we have an office in New York. But well, as you can imagine, we work digitally the 100% of the time, and we design and develop interactive data visualization and even complex and compound visual analytical tools for our clients. But every time we try to forget that our main job is to design solutions that get people closer to data. We try not to forget that data are not only numbers, and that numbers always stand for something else. And especially in my personal research, I'm very much interested to see if it's possible to build data-driven experiences, even digital ones, that can become the foundations of human relationship for human connection. And very briefly, to this regard, a very beautiful challenge was posed by to us by this woman. Her name is Samantha Cristoforetti. She's the first Italian woman astronaut, and she was launched on the International Space Station in November, and she is still up there right now. So she contacted us to see if we could build some real-time visualizations while she would be in space, and of course, that would have been tons of data to visualize. But we thought that this occasion needed to be a really special one. It needed to be a project about people. So we designed and developed an interactive application that we called Friends in Space. And the core idea of that is very simple. You log in with your social profiles. You can see Samantha's real-time position above your head, as well as a map of the people, all of the people around the world that are online in the platform at this moment. And the whole experience is built around the simple gesture of saying hello to Samantha when she flies over you, and hello to the people that in that moment are looking at the stars and had Samantha with you from their position on the map. A sort of digital hello that leads you to bond with stranger through data in a way, with a lot of serendipity. And so in my profession, and when I work on data visualization project, both personal and business one, I believe we really have to remember that data are a proxy, a way to count and represent something else, and in this case, human relationship. And so when we represent data also in digital and interactive ways, we have to make sure that we are reconnecting the numbers to their meanings, being truthful to their nature, which to me is very much related to what Stefanie and I are doing together, and you will see it in a little bit. Oh, and thanks to Friends in Space, I got to send one of my drawings in space. because Samantha asked me to draw the cover for these little books of poetry about the unknown that she brought up there with her and that she will bring back after they traveled in space. And yeah, best career achievement ever.
And as I mentioned before, I'm Stefanie. I'm originally from Denver, but I've lived in London for the past 12 years. And I run my own business working both as an information designer and as a sometime, quote, data illustrator, where I use data as material to design with and to communicate with in a more emotive and subjective way. And so many of my projects involve a manual approach to gathering and analyzing data. I've always tended to use this laborious process as a way to know more fully and engage with my data before creating the final visualization pieces. However, as shown in this close-up, my interest in working with data in a handcrafted way has also grown to include drawing data for a final piece in order to achieve a particular aesthetic. And as interested as I am in digital processes, I'm always drawn back to working with data in a physical way, first through drawing and more recently through creating physical installations or objects. So for example, I've been exploring projects where a viewer is able to physically move through data. And this started during my time as a data artist in residence at Facebook, where I converted a couple's interactions on Facebook into dance steps. So this interaction, this dance across Facebook timelines, could be experienced in the physical realm. So this is just a snippet of me and my husband dancing through a couple's diagram. And that project led to a recent installation at the South Bank Centre in London, where I created an open data playground by creating hopscotches derived from open data sets, where just by moving through these diagrams in a variety of different ways, visitors were illustrating the key tenet of open data, that open data is there for all to use, all to play with, and interpret however they choose. And finally, I've been exploring the communication of open air quality data from Sheffield through wearable objects in a small art commission with my collaborator, Miriam Quick. So as part of the project, first we explored neck pieces showing pollution data for 3 weeks in 2014. So by running one's fingers over each necklace, the wearer can literally feel how the air quality in Sheffield went up and down over the course of each week, as difference in pollution levels is indicated by the sharpness or the smoothness of each bead. Or another part of this project was these 3 pairs of glasses, and each pair represented 1 day of air pollution in Sheffield. And these glasses had a pattern etched onto the lenses where higher levels of pollutant are indicated by a larger pattern on the lens. And so this pattern clouds the wearer's vision, alluding to the hazy views caused by pollutants in the air. So by wearing the glasses, the wearer can literally see differences in haze and fog and the difference in air quality in Sheffield on different days of the year. And so with all of these projects, they highlight an interest in the analog and the hand-drawn and the physical when it comes to data. So you can see that there are many crossovers between my and Giorgia's work.
So Stefanie and I, we met here at Eyeo in 2013, but we didn't get close immediately. I guess we were more like scrutinizing each other, getting confident with the idea that there was another analog animal in this like digital and code-driven data visualization zoo. Because we both don't code, we work with developers indeed, but we don't code. One day, no, I don't think so. Yeah, we met again here for the second time at Eyeo last year. We talked more, we had some drinks together, and long story short, by the end of the festival, we decided that we absolutely had to collaborate on something that had to deal with data, on something analog, on something that has to deal with drawings and with our lives. Because the feeling that we have at the conference was really that we wanted to get to know each other better. So we started to exchange emails, but what could a collaboration be? How could we merge our similar ways of working together to complement the other? And most of all, how could we draw together since we live 5,000 kilometers apart? And we actually took the constraint of being so far apart as an asset. And after sending a lot of emails and refining the concept throughout the summer, we decided on hand-drawn data postcards about our daily life that we would send across the ocean to the other person. Actually, a series of data postcards, a whole year of weekly physically postcard exchange. Pretty demanding as a side project indeed. So I wish you were here. My weeks in data and drawing was how we originally named the project, but we have to credit my boyfriend, who is also here and happens to be one of my partners at Accurate, for the title. So it was one of the situations when he tells me, grab a pen and write this down. Dear Data, two women who switch continents get to know each other through the data they draw and send across the pond. It was a nice one, indeed.
So thank you, Gabriele, wherever you are out there.
But of course, I hate it was not my idea. Yeah.
So we started this project last September 1st, and this is how the process works. So each week, we agree on the general topic, and we focus on gathering data on this topic from Monday to Sunday. But we don't set the rules for the exact type of data we gather. This is up to each of us. And these topics range from the serious, the lighthearted, to the mundane, as shown above. And as we gather this weekly data, this process is more labor-intensive than just using standard metrics derived from technological devices. We record data from our everyday lives that often can't be gathered in any other way but through doing it by hand. So we don't just quantify numbers, but we also try to add qualitative details to our data collection wherever we can in order to add more human nuances to our data set as well. And then we begin to draw our card, and the drawing process is, of course, very slow. It often requires tests and trials and lots of frustration and lots of wasted postcards before we finally get to a point where we're happy with our visualization and its annotation and explanation. And then we drop the postcard in our mailbox on Mondays and wait with our fingers crossed, because there's always a possibility, as has happened multiple times, that the postcard just won't show up. But if all goes well, eventually the postcard will arrive at the other person's address with all the scuff marks and traces of its physical journey over the ocean. So in a way, snail mail can be considered the third collaborator on the project. Though, unfortunately, Giorgia's cards seem to be unluckier than mine and are often crumpled up and damaged, though I think this is because of how the postman just carelessly jams them through the mail slot in my door, as you can see there.
So for Dear Data, we purposely set initial constraints for the postcard to form a consistent collection. The front of the postcard contains no text or explanation at all. It is a beautiful, well, awfully beautiful drawing that one could just take as an illustration if you don't know that there is data behind. While the back of the postcards always contains the address, of course, the title of the project and of the week, and the legend, so how to read our drawings. And it is important to us that our personal data are experienced in this physical format, like the postcard. We both like the act of discovering while physically flipping the card to the front, from the back to the front over and over, as opposed to as everything in the same visible place. And what we wanted to do with these constraints was building a template that could not only create a consistent collection, but also that could support hundreds of stories, actually at least 52 parallel ones. So not only the layout, but also the rigid structure of the project and of the timing, they definitely helps us stick into it. And we right now are already at week 40, which is really like that much. So there are just clear rules that offer a space for creative experimentations.
And so you can see that this whole process is very slow. So neither of us sees the other person's drawing until we have it physically in our hands. So we're always really looking forward to receiving the postcard. And I guess with this project, it's less about big data. It is more about incredibly slow data. Lame data joke. Okay. Also, we're keeping records of the entire process, including our notes, our preliminary sketches, and photos of the intermediate postcard crafting stages in order to document how our data collection and drawing evolves through time. But now, let's have the postcards speak for themselves. So our first week in September, the topic was about clocks. So how many times do we check the time in a week, and on what type of device do we check the time? And We originally thought that we'd gather all of our data by hand in little notebooks because, yes, we were crazy, but we soon decided that this was madness, and this is the only week where we tried to do this. And so now we use notes in our phone, or we use the Reporter app, so thank you, Nick Felton, and many other different ways of gathering our data that are slightly more efficient.
So my first card to for Stefanie looks like a Morse alphabet kind of thing. Each little symbol that you see is a time I check the time on my 7 days and for every hour in chronological order. Personally, I added a lot of details to my collection to give Stefanie the idea of what I was doing. Like, did I check the time on purpose, like because I really wanted to know what time it was? Or did I ended up checking it because I was thinking I had to track it? Or why did I do it? Like, was I bored, was in a hurry, or hungry? Of course, the topics seem pretty cold, like clocks, but the whole point here is the more personal and anecdotal. You're not supposed to laugh here. I was
Serious
telling.
stuff.
Yeah. No, the more personal and anecdotal details we choose to add to every log, actually, the more we tell a story about our days to a person that doesn't know us, and the more we can observe patterns on ourselves. And so the topic are almost excuses to touch upon different aspects of our lives. And I also figured it would be nice, design-wise, to assign the data that was somehow related to Dear Data and or to Stefanie a color and keep it consistent throughout the postcards. So in this case, I glanced at the clock while texting or emailing Stefanie, and so my pink pen in my postcard will always indicate that from now on.
And so this is my card from the first week, and it's just a radial 24-hour pattern where different symbols represent different types of clocks. But my main memory from the week is that I was wasting multiple cards, and I was freaking out, and I said to my husband, God, I'm really, really crap at drawing. And his only response was, well, you'll be better after a year, right?
It was a great one. Yeah.
Supportive.
Yeah. The week after the first one, we tracked our walks and transportation through our cities, to Stefanie in London and me in New York. And here we turned on the Moves app to track our data. And this was actually the first time and the last time that we used an external app to automatically track us. In a way, it felt that we weren't very much in control, even if we noted any further details down about our path. We then agreed that it felt like impersonal to be tracked by an app as opposed to track our data actively. Well, the pattern is already clear. I over-detail my data collection and my postcards. And anyway, without entering into details here, it happened here that I had the first personal data tale to tell Stefanie. The treat of the week was running into a guy you must have heard of. So I wrote, run into a friend who is also your friend, who also does self-reports, but he's way more famous than the two of us. Which means I ran into Nick Felton, of course. And that was a good encounter for my data postcard, indeed. Then we tracked our thank yous, and this was actually the very first hard one. Saying thank you and having to report it, your mind can definitely trick you here. So you start noticing that you're about to say thank you before it even comes out to your mind, and so eventually you can decide not to say it in the first place. We really experienced this first tricky kind of thing here. And this was also the first week that we experienced a postal disservice. After 10 days that I posted my card, I found it back in my mailbox. It was all dirty and folded, and a yellow sticker was on it and said, return to sender, address not known, unable to forward. So far, we've had 2 missing cards of mine, 3 of Stefanie's missing, 2 of mine being returned, and a lot of mine being messed up by the traveling. But this is really part of the whole thing, and also nicely and mysterious to think about it, like those data guys traveling overseas.
And so as the weeks progressed, we started to explore different themes for each week, focusing mainly on themes requiring this manual data collection. So for 1 week, we tracked compliments we received, and actually just look at Giorgia's card, look how crumpled it is right there on the left. And another week, we noted all of the sounds we heard around us. So we were gathering sound data every single hour we were awake for that week. Or we spent a week tracking every moment we were alone. And so you can see from our cards that often our visual responses are quite similar, and we only discover this when we both receive each other's card. Or for a week of interesting things, where we tracked every time a subject interested us or intrigued us, we challenged ourselves to explore different techniques, namely the use of collage paper in this case. And so this is just a small selection of our cards for now. But as you can see, every week is an exploration of small, incomplete data made very human and very personal due to its inherent imperfections, and where even the choices in data collection that we each make function as a unique representation of each person.
And the postcard become a souvenir of our lives in a way, as we see it. Like personally, I'm not a person that was able to keep a diary, but Dear Data is definitely a source of nice memories. And when I look back at my postcard, for example, I can't help but smiling and remembering details about these weeks. And those snapshots help me noticing and acknowledging the passing of time and remembering what happened during those weeks that have passed. So what's interesting here to us is not necessarily the single week topic. They are pretexts to log moments of our days and glimpses of our personalities. And what interests us the most is the composition of the portrait of the other person through those fragments of her nature. And every week we add teeny little pieces to the puzzle to the other person. Then after some months of Dear Data, we wanted to challenge ourselves to find data even where it's not that obvious. Because to talk about our lives and to get to know each other also involves addressing aspects that go beyond the mere daily tracking, activity tracking. There are areas of our personalities that can be expressed also through, for example, a survey of what we own. So at week 16, we decided to take on an archaeological approach where we just once in the week analyze, categorize, and quantify our wardrobes. Well, as a person, I take a compulsive pleasure in tidying and organizing my belongings, and even the ones that are behind closed doors. I just can't have my wardrobe being not properly organized. And everything in there is well-ordered, color-coded, folded according to my rules. And so I thought that it was interesting to push this point and visually, literally represent it for Stefanie. So I went to my wardrobe with the precise idea to report it the exact way it is laid out, representing my dresses through their exact colors and lengths and position, because they can be seen as data. So I realized stronger than I ever done before through this survey that I own a lot of garments of the same type, like the exact sweater, but in different colors. So I highlighted it with connection arcs on the postcards. Lots of clothes are striped, and so I actually added a symbol below to represent it. To my shame, a lot of pieces weren't worn for at least 1 year, so I indicated this as well. And well, my boyfriend and I, we share the wardrobe, so I had to represent his clothes as well, which are only the elements that you see between square brackets. Yes.
And so this is the front of my card, and again, you see how we often arrive at similar visual solutions without realizing it until we see each other's cards. And so I organize my wardrobe data differently than Giorgia, organizing it as my clothing as it's organized in my mind, where, whether it's an article of clothing for special occasions or was once professional wear but had been downgraded to only be worn around the house and so on. And so it highlights how I tend to mainly buy clothing that both functions as work clothing for, quote, creative, and it won't get messed up at a party, and it's club-proof. Like, that is my dream dress.
This is genius.
Genius, yeah. And okay, remember Giorgia's wardrobe, right? Remember how nice and neat it was? Well, okay, since we're showing you pictures of our wardrobes, I felt a bit embarrassed telling Giorgia that since moving to our new house 2 years ago, I've been keeping my clothes stuffed in a filing cabinet because we haven't bought a wardrobe yet.
And you haven't sent me this picture, actually.
No.
Only while we were shaping the top.
I'm embarrassed. I would never show it to her.
Anyway, then on a survey mode, we examined our makeup products, surveying all of what we have and drawing it in form of data visualization. And I used my lipstick as pencil, like I drew with them, exactly because I wanted to give Stefanie the idea of how monotonous I am with my lipstick colors, even if we both love red lipstick, apparently.
And we also decided to try to see if we could use their data to become better human beings, exploring performative weeks where we would try to change our behavior by performing acts on purpose so we could track them.
Yeah, so we both fear that we would end up sending empty postcards.
So, for example, we had a week where we would be very kind and considerate with people around us. We would force ourselves to be nice and attentive in situations where we wouldn't have done it, and it was like incredibly difficult. So by the end of the week, I only had a little sprinkling of little nice acts I had done into others. So like, look at all that white space, right? And I was so ashamed of this. I was hoping that if I made a joke out of it, Giorgia wouldn't realize how terrible of a person I was. So like drew the magnifying glass and, said I was an asshole. Or we had one where we would smile at strangers for the week. And so I think Giorgia definitely was more successful than I was, as I really, really hated this week, because if you smile at people in London, they think you're crazy, and I just didn't want to do it. I just hated it. And so I ended up abandoning the week on Saturday night after needing to pee at a crowded concert and smiling at people in the crowd so they would let me through, and no one smiled back. And that's when I decided I was not going to smile at anyone else on Sunday out of protest. And so that was my turmoil, and all of this has been duly noted on the card. So maybe I don't feel that bad about not being nice, because no one else is either. So that's the moral of the story.
So yes, we tried to smile and we tracked it. Personally, I also tracked where we were, how my smile was, like could I really do a true and genuine smile, who the stranger were, and I tracked their reaction. So did they notice and smile back? Did they pretend they haven't noticed? And it happened so many times. And I also had one person stopping me and asking, do we know each other? Just because I smiled. Let's just say that that wasn't one of the best weeks. Yeah.
And now, sometimes weeks become performative in a way that's unplanned. So we very recently did a week of swearing, and I absolutely love to swear. So I took the opportunity to swear more often, and it was brilliant. And so this is my card here, and every dash is time I swore that week. So there's loads of rude words listed. And you can see how much I say the F word in all of its forms and variations over on the left. And there are some swear words I'm too ashamed to show publicly on a massive screen. So I black it out. So just ask me after and I'll tell you. So even though this doesn't officially count as a performative week, I'm counting it, and it was my favorite so far.
Okay, now we are serious. Some weeks are very insightful, especially the one that touch particular buttons, such as our obsessions, or the one that addresses personal matters, or the one that makes you realize even little aspects of yourself that you weren't aware of. For example, going back to my thank you card very quickly, the different branches here represent different categories of people I thanked, like friends, family, boyfriends, strangers, waiters. My thank you with their attributes are the little elements on the upper part of each branch, and the thank you that I got are the one in the lower part. And the little curves with the branches indicate if the person was the same one, and a lot of other details. But what really jumped out at me when looking at my data was how many thanks I say to strangers. You have to know I am an unbelievably compulsive thanker to waiter and waitresses, apparently. Look at how many dots above the waiters branch. But I don't really thank you so much, my friends and family. I don't. And actually, this hurts when you realize it so neatly. Or the weeks that we track complaints, I do complain a lot. And honestly, I haven't really realized it before this week, specifically to and about my boyfriend, regularly and about the same kind of stuff. Like, I'm cold, I'm freezing, I'm bored, oh, the service here is so slow, you should have done it, stop snoring. And I know that everybody of us probably can relate. But looking at the actual number, it is shameful. And I can tell you it helps, like, taking action about it. It really helps when you see the numbers. Some weeks, then, are just liberating, like food preferences. It was another survey kind of week where we surveyed our mind and our personal taste for food. So I am the pickiest person I know about food. I basically eat as a child with a picky palate, and I'm pretty rigid about all of my weird eating habits. And I mean, I like very few things, and most of them are not even proper food. And I'm surprised about how my friend and my boyfriend bear with me, but what would Stefanie and other people think about my childish way of eating? So actually, I crafted my postcard as a guess what food is it for Stefanie, giving her hints about my beloved and hate kind of foods and dishes, but not really revealing them. But from these hints, I think she could definitely tell how unhealthy I am with my eating. But my eating habits are not the point here. Where I'm going with it is that I'm finding that this particular way of sharing, even your weirdest habit, your flaws, in these tiny quantitative bits every week, it helps you not being afraid of doing it, of sharing it in a way. And it also feels like much more better afterwards, actually. I mean, whatever. Another example is our week 27 media, where we tracked what we read during our week in newspaper and media. And okay, so I don't read about politics, news stories, economy, or what's going on in the world. I basically read only things that matter in my daily life, like data, art, design, personal psychology kind of stuff. And I spent a good bit of my adulthood pretending that I eventually could be interested in stuff that normal people read, but I just don't. So now you also know what you shouldn't ask me to talk about. But again, this is another part of myself that is shameful to share, but now that I associate it with this postcard of myself that I actually like, well, it doesn't hurt anymore, in a way. So, since Stefanie and I are both designers, she gets who I am from the whole piece and not only from the data. Like, we are telling something about ourselves also with the very way we draw data in the postcard. And sketching with data can be seen as a spontaneous shortcut from your inner way to representing the data in your mind to the final result. Because you can't pull in the data on a tool and generate a result. You definitely have to craft your data visualization. And before sitting down and drawing my postcard, I always lose myself in images, as I always do in my daily job before starting designing. And there are a lot of visual metaphors that can be borrowed and translated to visual compositions of data. And there is no shame in it if you don't manipulate the data, of course. For example, in week 7, when we track complaints, and I already cover how much I do complain, I wanted to return Stefanie the repetitiveness of my act of complaining, and at the same time to show her the level of the complaint, like when they were needed or totally out of place. And I found the musical score reference to be a perfect one for my complaints. So I got a musical complaint card where the horizontal lines are the different kind of complaints, like about what, and every note is a single complaint in chronological order, and the 3 lines per each score indicate the level of the complaint. And yeah, and then I have my usual 1,000 of attributes for each log, but I have a pink one. Of course, it's something I complained about to Stefanie in a text. Or sometimes you just want to do a beautiful drawing and somehow represent how the data look like through the style you're drawing it. So on week 14, we logged our schedule and productivity, and I just wanted to compose a drawing with data that could reflect the cocktail mix of different activities that my days are made of. And as I wrote on the legend, the position and rotation of the elements are absolutely random and direct function of the aesthetic composition I wanted to create. I usually spend really a lot of time figuring out the best principle to arrange my data spatially, but this time I gave myself the freedom to experiment a little bit more. And I mean, if you don't do that with personal project, when do you do that? And I think that we both want this to be a sort of permanent R&D sandbox for our professional lives, and I think that we see this experimentation incredibly useful. Well, finally, drawing with data, when drawing is the final output, can be painful. Or let's say it is painful. It is laborious, it is demanding, it is frustrating. And this is the perfect example of what I mean. Like doors, we here tracked all of the doors we passed through the week to give the other person the idea of the pace through our days, through internal and external environment. In this extremely obsessively detailed postcard, each little rectangle represents a door I opened and or passed through in chronological order with many, many attributes about the environment or the activity I was going to do in those places. I spent really, really a lot of time drawing it. And this is one of those moments when you realize how amazing the duplicate command in Illustrator is. Like, seriously. I think at this point I was simply swearing at myself. Every tiny rectangle took more than a minute to be drawn because I had to decode the data, look at my legend, make sure that I wasn't mistaking the legend, and draw. And think about that. You can't undo. You just can't. And it's so painful when the postcard is coming up nicely and you make a mistake. You have to start from scratch. But you know, on a positive ending, this is part of the whole thing. And we believe that spending time crafting our postcards is our way of thinking about the other person. It's our way of spending time together. I'm getting mellow, I know. With Dear Data, we wanted to make our data and our drawings like the core of this kind of future friendship. And I've been thinking about what is the difference between getting to know a person like in a normal way and in this data-driven way. And I realized that I know her on many levels. I have many different small entry points and views of her personality. And honestly, I think I know less of some of my closest friends. And remember that we only met 4 times in person. And I can tell you that this is really amazing, and it's definitely worth the Sunday morning of obsessive drawings.
And yeah, it is definitely worth it. And for me, part of what I enjoy so much about this project with Giorgia is not just discovering similarities between us, but discovering the differences, like how tidy she is and how I am not, and understanding a different viewpoint than my own on data and on design and life in general. Now, for me, our project has been an exploration into how data gathering and visualization can take on an emotional meaning when applied to our lives in this very manual, highly engaged manner. So, take counting. In this project, the act of counting becomes something that's emotionally charged. So, when we count someone or something for our weekly data sets, we acknowledge that a person or thing's existence is meaningful. So by gathering data from our interactions with a special person in our lives, we're showing that we care about this person. And this idea of counting as a way of showing someone they mean something to us is shown through our week of tracking our partners, which, okay, we did without their knowledge, which is a little bit unnerving and, I don't know, questionable, but still, we didn't want to mess up our data if they knew that they were being watched. So we both effectively ended up separately tracking moments when our partners inspired love or annoyance and irritation in us. And this is my card, and don't worry, feelings of love is represented by the lines on the top. So he's doing all right. But on a serious note, this card is like a love letter to my husband. This week, every moment I felt love for him, I counted him and I acknowledged him. Though, shamefully, if we flip the card, we can see what about my husband inspired the most feelings of love this week, and it was his body. Now, I promise I am not that superficial, like, honestly, but I did have to add that comment in red about my husband's mind at his request. So I do love him for his mind as well. But as we were tracking this without our partner's knowledge, on the evening of the last day, I told my husband, and I waited for him to be angry, but I think he just thought I was strange, luckily. And I asked if I could use this data, of course, and he said yes, and then he came back to me later and said he thought the tracking was, quote, kind of nice, weird, but nice. And so you can see this is just a tiny example of like how the issues of data consent and data privacy, they come into play regularly in our project, albeit on a domestic small scale. And so this weekly counting and noting that which is important to us can become a type of data token of affection. It's like a gift that Giorgia and I give each other, or we give to other people. For example, Giorgia and I gathered data about all of our physical contact for a week. And this is a close-up of my card, where each dot represents a deliberate physical contact, and it's grouped according to person. And again, this is my husband, obviously the person I had the most physical contact with. But this week also records the last time I physically touched my parents, which is when they visited London last autumn. And, and so this is a meaningful card for me already. I cherish this data set because I miss my parents, and this is a symbol of that time we spent together. So this data set means something to me. But what I really like about this card is that when I showed it to my husband, he asked for a scan of the postcard so he could have a record of the data for himself. So by giving him the card, I'm effectively presenting to him a previously invisible texture of our relationship, a data token of affection. So instead of giving flowers to someone, now we give data sets. So
That's a nice one.
yeah. As you do. So you can see that data Giorgia and I gather becomes an emotional record invested with quite an intimate meaning. And besides being this emotional record, the act of data gathering can also affect our emotions for the week, affecting us positively or negatively depending on that week's theme. So, for example, we often try to track negative things in order to understand these bad habits, but what we've both learned is that tracking things like envy, like shown on the screen now, or pessimism negatively affects us and brings us down, whereas tracking positive content like positive thoughts on the screen puts one in a good mood and it makes us feel more positive about our lives and the world around us. And another part of our project that I'm interested in is the act of noticing. So Giorgia and I both feel that this project has forced us to become more aware of the world around us, as the manual capture of most of our data makes an intensive level of awareness necessary. And Giorgia will talk about this in more detail in a bit. But for me, understanding what this noticing or awareness meant came most clearly during this week where we gathered data on all types of urban wildlife we saw in our cities. And so really, I pushed for this, for a theme, because I thought it was a really good excuse to search out all of the cats that live on my London estate and say hello to them. So I spent the week trying to spot as many animals as possible. And I was in this a hyper-aware noticing state to the point where my awareness was giving me, what you can see, some false positives. And so this is a really joyful week for me. I really love spending the week learning more about birds and different animals in my chosen country. And so each dash represents one animal noticed, radiating outwards by distance away from my estate and my house. So there were 6 instances of cat this week on the estate, so you know. But I finally realized this week, 34 weeks in, that each week isn't a scientific, comprehensive survey of every single animal I passed by, or every emotion I felt, and so on, but it was a record of Giorgia and I noticing, and us marking our awareness. So the main truth in these cards is that they are accurate representations of the amount of noticing we're doing. But that in itself is interesting. So some weeks we notice more, some weeks we notice less, and that is an indication of our personalities in our lives as well. Because often, if you aren't noticing, you end up having what we call a data void, where you forget to gather data, and I tend to have these quite a bit, and I think maybe more than Giorgia. However, I try to note these in the cards where I can, as they're still valuable, and they act as evidence of an extreme time in my life, so either an extremely good time, going out, hanging with friends, drinking, and so on, or a really stressful time where too much work and stress and tiredness impacts my ability to carefully gather data. So my personality is found in the voids I send to Giorgia as well. Also, this project has helped me learn more about myself as a designer. And you've seen our professional projects. I mean, we are both perfectionists, and like Giorgia was discussing, we've had to come to terms with the imperfections found in drawing by hand. But I tend to struggle more visibly with mistakes than Giorgia, and I apologize every time I make a mistake, as I feel embarrassed I just can't get it right. And a subsection of these annotated mistakes is that of left-hand smudges, which I'm sure lots of left-handed people in the audience can relate to. See? Oh my God, yes, every left-handers need love. But after weeks of having to draw and make something without fail every single week, my mindset is beginning to change, as illustrated in the annotations in this card, where I'm tired of the mistakes, still tired of the mistakes, and then finally at the end, I just lie. And so this last statement has been a massive thing I've learned in this weekly project. So just accept imperfections and post the card already. And so I know I need to stop apologizing about the imperfections, so I haven't quite gotten there yet. The stopping apologizing is the hardest bit. And to end upon my insights, one of the main things that I've noticed is that when you work with a topic you really love, your data gathering is so much stronger. So this is a card that Giorgia told me was one of the most insightful I had created, and I wish it was something more profound, but alas, it was just during our week of drinking. But I have to confess, I really love this week.
Me too.
Yeah, of course, right? And so this week was over New Year's, where good friends and I traveled to Scotland for a few days over the holidays. So each symbol represents a drink. The color is the reason for drinking. The number of dashes, color equals type of drink, and level of drunkenness is on a scale of 1 to 10. And so drinks are placed on the card by day and time. So, the time of drink is very critical, so I added a line to represent noon, that dividing line between debauched drinking and respectable drinking. However, I decided to break my rules this week by having a morning beer on the train to our destination. And this was, and this is an act of data manipulation because I really wanted a morning beer in my data. And over New Year's Eve and day, I was carefully recording all the reasons for drinking, including, and that was actually in my notes, just being wasted, of course. With only one little data void, which is pretty impressive when you consider it. So, very good.
As you can see, our postcards talk a lot about the two of us as designers. I mean, I hope that you can see it apart from our personal stories. It's nice. If you know our work, you can definitely find something of it on our drawings. Stefanie's postcards are colorful. They can really be experienced also from far away. She thinks more radial in general, and they make sense all together as a collection, as you can tell from these previews of her cards.
And Giorgia's make sense together as a collection.
No.
But they have this amazing level of fine detail and technical complexity that I just will never, ever be able to achieve. And I think, really, if you look closely, you can see Giorgia's architectural roots through the precision found in her drawings. And I really love how her data gathering is very much focused on an interrogation of personal emotions and feelings, like very nuanced ones that are so different to my data gathering, which is often just really straightforward. And this super complex data gathering freaks me out every time I get a new postcard. I mean, I send her photos like this, or I'm like, and then also, look at how perfect the back of her card is. Look at how organized it is.
You picked one of my worst, actually.
And I don't understand, because I actually thought this was one of her best. That's why I picked it, but.
Anyway. My obsession for details apart, making the project public was very important for us. Of course, you can have fun with the project, but the moment when you open it to the world, it is a very important one. What we really liked about the general response is that we are learning that this type of projects touch people on many levels, and it was so positive. And yes, we carefully selected some Eyeo folks here, for sure. When people tweet or write us, they use adjectives and words that you would hardly relate to a data-driven project. Oh, and this is indeed a good moment to remind you our Twitter handle, isn't it? No, but anyway, we don't find those labels diminishing by any means. Actually, quite the opposite. Data can be human, delicate, slow, and even warm. And also, a lot of messages point out how much they've been inspired by their data. People want to take action and either start a data drawing project or a self-investigative one themselves. It is incredible to us. And talking about the self-investigative aspect of the whole thing, what I learned the most so far is how to pay attention, as Stefanie was anticipating, how to be more aware of my surroundings and of my behavior. And maybe it is because I see all of these things that I track every day as the elements that will compose my postcards. I think it's hard to say that I've changed because it's hard to change in a few months, but I'd honestly say that this is helping questioning myself on a very different and deeper level. And now I just can't help but noticing and noting down things and reflecting upon that. It's almost a state of mind. I know this might sound pretty nerdy, but sometimes I now ask myself, how didn't even I look at my days before the data? Like, how were my days without a data assignment? Personally, I find it incredibly easier to focus on a single little aspect of my life very rigidly every week instead of tracking multiple ones at the same time, like I always meant to do in my past, but with no results. And yeah, on our conclusions, many people associate the quantifiable and quantitative with precision and objectiveness, and that there is this idea that personal tracking will solve your problems, but we believe that the clue here is looking for questions on yourself instead. But what I love the most about Dear Data personally is that it makes a very big passion of mine concrete. So now the data drawing gets to be the final output, the final result, and not just an intermediate step that I would then redo digitally. It really includes a sort of subjectivity and human touch in the way I'm doing data visualization, even for my professional life. And generally speaking, anyone can do this. Anyone can start a project like this tomorrow and have results. There is no barrier, no particular skills needed, just buy a little pencils maybe.
And so finally, let's end on friendship and on one of the biggest takeaways we got from the project. And yeah, we use emojis now because we're good friends.
Yeah.
That's what that screen's about. So we've still only met 4 times in person. But because of this project, we are in constant communication daily, and we feel very present in each other's lives, and it's very easy to forget that we actually don't live in the same place. And so each data postcard is the beginning of a conversation, a starting point to ask each other questions. And it's nice that these postcards are entry points to our lives. So when we receive each other's postcards, we usually text and we ask specific questions that start from the data. So
yeah, and questions that, in the spirit of sharing, can lead to shameful revelations. But this is part of the game, and we're not afraid of it anymore. Yeah, by the way, this is me on my heavy metal band when I was a teenager. But what we wanted to say with it is that it's easy to forget that data are the representation of something else. And with a project like that we can definitely perceive this very important aspect that anyone should keep in mind while working with data, we believe.
And perhaps on a wider level, this is how we should see data in every aspect of our life. So as a starting point for questioning and understanding, instead of always the ultimate truth and the definitive answer to all of our questions. So currently, like we've said, we're at week 40, so we only have 12 weeks left. And on our website, we upload new postcards regularly every Wednesday.
And we are now on a good way to starting making a book out of Dear Data, and we're starting to think of the best way to exhibit our postcards. And so you have no idea how excited we are about the development of this collaboration, of this friendship. It's really contributing to the idea of growth and learning that we want for our lives. And in case you were wondering, the topic of this week is Eyeo people, new people we meet.
And so it's basically a challenge between the two of us. So how many new human connections can we each make in a week? So help us, come and say hi.
And
ready.
Thank you. And most of all, let's truly enjoy this amazing week ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you.